Lionel Chmilewsky, welcome to the African Tech Roundup.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Well, absolutely. Perhaps let's start with you explaining how an MBA from Rowan Business School ends up at a leading tech firm.
Sure. So first, I have always liked technology, because, this is an area where you need to innovate, to transform, to scale, to do teamwork, to get the best talent on board, to create, and this is what I have always liked to do. So technology was a natural fit for me. And, my first job was in technology. I worked for a satellite company in the US. And since then, I've never left technology. So that's how I came into Cambridge. I think the interesting thing with technology at that time, and that's more than 20 years ago. I mean, technology was mostly driven, at least for the top management guys, was mostly driven by engineers. And I thought that a perspective from someone, having done a business school, would be of some benefit. So that's how I started to collaborate with technology firms. And as I said, I never left.
Right. So, look, in a moment, I'll ask you to tell me about some of your projects on the continent, including one that I'm particularly interested in, a wireless broadband project you guys are working on in Guinea. But first, what do you reckon the next big trend in wireless technology globally would be? So speak globally first and then specific to Africa. What's the next big thing globally, and what's the next big thing as far as wireless technology on the continent?
Yes, this is a very interesting question, and I don't think that there's the next big thing, or I would say it differently. There's always a next big thing, but if you're looking at things that people are looking for, and I think that's true in several technology domains, not only in telecom, people are asking for more capacity, people are asking for a quicker time to market, people are asking for a very good quality of service, and people are asking for a low cost. And when you're looking at the computers, when you're looking at the smartphones, that's basically the same trends. I think the interesting thing as a general trends in the market regarding telecom is, first, you're seeing people that want more and more video streaming. You're seeing people that are using more and more smaller and smaller smartphones. You're seeing people that are now moving into the Internet of Things. And then you're seeing people using more and more the cloud. And all of that requires much more capacity. So you need to provide a network that accommodates with those requests in high capacity. 10 years ago, people were extremely happy when they had 1 meg of traffic. Now they're asking for 1 gig of traffic. So, I mean, that's a natural trend. The other one, as I said, is time to market. Now people want to have things immediately. In the past, it was normal to wait 2 months, 3 months to get a telephone line. Now people, when they go to, to an Orange, when they go to EE, when they go to an MTN, to a Vodafone, they subscribe, they want to have the facility being provided to them right away. Then there's more and more demand, as I said, for quality of service. I mean, you're not expecting to have to wait a long time to see what you've downloaded, and you expect what you're seeing either on your phone, on your computer, to be HD, so high definition or ultra high definition. So clearly the expectations have changed. And last but not least, I mean, everyone wants to have a better quality of service, higher capacity for a lower cost. And the competitive environment has allowed that to happen. So those are the general trends. So IoT, smartphones, video streaming, and the cloud. If you're looking at the specifics in Africa, basically people will require exactly the same thing. But the difference is that in Africa, in some of the countries, you have a more limited infrastructure deployment. You all know that the ARPU is much lower than what you see in other continents or other countries. There are quite a lot of countries where the ARPU in Africa is between $5 to $10, while when you're looking at what it is, for instance, in the US, it's 10 times as more in the US. Then the other thing which is very specific is you have a pretty big digital divide. So you need to find an infrastructure that allows you to bridge that digital divide. And then, you have areas where you have extremely highly densified population and areas where you have almost no one there. So you need to find a way to build infrastructure to cope with all those specifics in Africa. And I believe that wireless is a technology that is an extremely good fit for that.
And are you finding that this is a utility-driven environment or a cost-driven environment where the consumer is sort of driving it? Or is big business still pretty much dictating terms in terms of, what the market should take? What are you finding? Are you finding that the things you've described basically drive you guys to innovate in a certain direction, or does it work the other way around? Are we content as consumers just to take what you're putting out?
Well, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all, and every country has its own characteristics or specificities. We're seeing more and more. It started in some of the countries with the enterprise, because those guys were able to pay a pretty high price. And thus, those guys were supposed to get a high throughput, high capacity, high quality of service. But that has generalized to the consumers now. And I think the expectations from the enterprise customers and from the residential customers are more or less the same. So it's just a matter of fine-tuning what type of deployment you want to do in order to accommodate for both. But I would say it's a general trend, and we're seeing a drive both on the enterprise side and on the consumer side.
Right. So talk us through some of the newer emerging operator business cases on the continent for how network functions visualization, NFV, is creating new multi-purpose networks and supporting, more unified communication strategies. Talk us through some of the use cases for a seamless delivery of communication.
Yeah. So first, let me explain how we are doing those NFV. So I don't know how much you know about point to multipoint, but what we're doing here is that we're mutualizing the infrastructure at the hub site, and then we are basically sharing through our software. We're sharing the capacity between several remote sites. So basically, you don't need to have at the hub site a one-for-one. You only have one piece of equipment, and then you're smartly sharing the capacity with tens or hundreds of remote sites. So I think that's a very cost-effective and smart way to share capacity, allowing still each of the remote terminals to have access to the full capacity. So that's how we are doing it.
What is the more sort of traditional approach? What is the typical infrastructure, opposite what you've just told me?
Yeah, so normally the typical infrastructure is to put one piece of equipment at the hub site for every remote terminal that you have. So this is what people call point-to-point. The problem with point-to-point is that, the more remote sites you have, the more expensive it is to build the infrastructure at the hub site. So that's why we, as CBNL, invented about 16 years ago a concept that would allow the remote site terminals to share the common infrastructure with a view, and that has always been our driving factor, with a view to reduce total cost of ownership for the enterprises and for the consumers. So basically,
is this designed as a complementary technology to what's existing, or is it designed to replace it or improve upon it in time?
It's a combination of both. I mean, in some of the cases, we are replacing full point-to-point networks. In some of the cases, we are complementing point-to-point networks. Depends of what the operators or what the businesses want to achieve. I think point-to-point, there's still some interesting advantages if you want to have extremely long range or extremely high throughput, but that has a price, that has a cost. But in cases where you have range up to 20 kilometers and when you have constraints on your spending, then point-to-multipoint makes sense. So depending on what type of network the operators want to build, we could be either replacing or complementing a point-to-point network. And
But I do imagine for like a small country, like for smaller countries on the continent, I think of countries like Guinea, perhaps countries like Swaziland or Lesotho, for example. Also considering, countries like Rwanda, they've got like very mountainous and lots of vegetation and that kind of thing. I'd imagine situations like that would be excellent use cases for the kind of technology.
Yeah, sure. So what is a good use case for that technology is clearly when you don't want to or you cannot deploy fiber networks. The beauty of fiber is that it is unlimited capacity. So once the fiber is deployed, then you have extremely good access to high capacity. But the problem with fiber is also it costs lots of money to deploy because you need to dig trenches. Then you need to build the fiber network. And sometimes, in regions or landscape that you've mentioned, it's not something you can do. When you have mountains and everything, not easy to build a fiber network. So once again, you have to take into account the topology of your country and then find the best solution. But the nice thing with wireless networks, and particularly point-to-multipoint wireless networks, is that you can deploy very quickly, because it takes a couple hours to build a few sites on point-to-multipoint technology. The beauty of point-to-multipoint, as I explained, is you go only once to the hub, and then whenever you add remote terminals, you don't need to go back to the hub to deploy further equipment. So, while on point-to-point, whenever you deploy a remote terminal, you need to deploy one piece of equipment at the hub. So, beauty of point-to-multipoint is also time to market and how quick it is to deploy a network.
But I do imagine that on the flip side, there are also limitations in as far as, capacity and that kind of thing. If you're thinking in terms of population growth and things like that, am I correct?
Yeah, well, and I believe there's a fit for each of those technologies, and that's why, by the way, the operators are mixing in their network fiber, and only they're using the fiber for the big and long haul network, and then when you're getting closer to the edge, then you're seeing more and more wireless, because that makes more sense. So normally for the big, either submarine or terrestrial backbone networks, you see fiber, and then you see that being distributed through wireless.
I suppose on many levels, these are economic matters, and perhaps that's where your MBA comes in. I think for the everyday person, we probably don't realize just how much economics factor into network design and maintenance, and certainly upgrades and things like that. So, speak to people, listening to us right now who are adamant that the public is being overcharged for mobile data or broadband. What makes delivering mobile data, a challenge to deliver in Africa, and perhaps more of a challenge than, say, delivering broadband via fiber networks elsewhere in the world? What might we not be fully understanding as a public with regards to how these services are delivered?
So there are several things. When operators are charging customers, either consumers, residential or enterprises, there are a few things to take into account. First thing is, how much does it cost them to deploy their network? So not only the cost of the infrastructure, but the cost of the maintenance of the network, the cost of the spectrum when they have to buy spectrum, the cost of the maintenance. All those costs could be pretty heavy. So that's the first element. So how much does it cost them to build a network and to run a network? Second thing is, okay, what is the competitive environment? Is it one competitor? Is it 10 competitors? That has an impact as well. And third thing is, what are the customers, either enterprises or residential, are willing to pay? So they have to take that into account whenever they charge or they price their services. Generally speaking, building a fiber network is quite expensive. As I said previously, once it is built, then of course it provides a great deal of capacity. But I think the problem with that is the operators have to make a pretty heavy upfront investment. And thus, if they want to make their business case reliable and sustainable, they have to charge at a pretty high price. The beauty of wireless, and more particularly the point-to-multipoint wireless networks that CBNL delivers and supplies, is that you can basically pay as you grow. So you can start with a pretty modest network, let's say one access point and one remote terminal, and then as you're getting more and more businesses, you can invest more and more in your network. So then you can have a very interesting pricing model to your customers. Then, as I said, in terms of investment itself, because of the point-to-multipoint and virtual networks that we're providing, the total cost of ownership, both OPEX and CAPEX, is between 30 to 50% less expensive with our technology than other point-to-point or fiber technologies. So yes, I would consider that as being an opportunity more than a challenge, and this is why we're seeing more and more customers. This is why we're getting more and more new customers in Africa and generally speaking all around the world.
And so, what do you make of all the recent announcements that we've heard? You're quite in touch with what's happening here on the continent, particularly in South Africa. There've been announcements by the likes of Vodacom, MTN, as well as smaller companies like Dark Fiber Africa, all declaring how they'll be investing aggressively in IoT infrastructure over the next couple of years. Would your technologies be at play in these sort of endeavors?
Yes, we clearly are, and we have been for quite a while. At the end of the day, as I said, all those new technologies or new, I would say, ways of communicating will create a bottleneck at a certain level of the network. So, for instance, if you take IoT is normally a pretty low speed, pretty low capacity, moving from one place to another place, but there are thousands or millions or billions of those devices. And when you're looking at IoT, there's probably going to be about 50 billion connected devices in the next 5 to 7 years. So lots of devices, pretty low throughput, but those devices at some point need to go to the core of the network. So you need to find ways to aggregate all those low speeds connections into a pretty high capacity pipe. So this is where we're playing. So we are working a lot on finding the best and the most cost-effective ways to optimize how we are aggregating the IoT to the core of the network.
When I think of the kind of technology you guys are involved in, I think of some of your larger competitors, the Huaweis of this world, and your ZTEs, etc. Who is eye level as far as you're concerned in terms of the size of your business, the projects that you're typically roped into? Give me an example of someone who you might consider a direct competitor to what you're doing. I mean, granted, you've got unique technologies, but in terms of like delivering solutions, who in the world do you guys do you consider a peer?
Well, if you're looking at how we could segment the market, so you have companies that are doing the same things as we do, which is point to multipoint licensed wireless technologies, and there's a couple of companies that are active in that segment. But CBNL is clearly the leader with I would say 40 to 50% market share. So that's one type of competitors. Then you have all the big players, people like the Huawei, the ZTE, the Ericsson, the Nokia that you mentioned, that are mostly providing point-to-point technologies. They're also providing fiber, but on the wireless side, they're providing point-to-point technologies. And this is really the market that we are now tackling. In the past, there was a pretty big gap between point-to-point and point-to-multipoint. Point-to-point being higher capacity, much longer range, but that gap is now becoming narrower and narrower. So there's almost no major differences in terms of capacity between point-to-point and point-to-multipoint. So my point to speak so is that now we are targeting at replacing more and more of those point-to-point networks being sold by the big guys, as I call them.
And do you mean in terms of reliability? In my mind, it's not quite right to compare, say, 4G LTE, technology with, say, Wi-Fi in terms of reliability. I mean, there are obviously different reasons you'd use different ones, etc. But from a reliability point of view, they're not comparable technologies at this point. You're saying that a multipoint technology has reached a point-to-multipoint technology has reached a point where you can compete in terms of reliability and quality as well?
Yes, what we're providing is clearly carrier-grade products. So, I mean, we are operating in what we call a licensed segment, which means that for an operator to deploy a network, they must obtain first the spectrum from the regulator, the frequency from the regulator. The beauty of a licensed spectrum is that it's less congested, less polluted than the Wi-Fi products that are non-licensed, unlicensed. So it means that anyone, when you're deploying an unlicensed networks, anyone can deploy such a network, which means that you can have in a very short range, in a very small area, you can have, 5, 6, 10 networks living one next to the other. So bottom line is the networks are congested and they are interfering one with the other, which is not the case at all when you have licensed networks, which is exactly what we do. At the end of the day, and I'm not saying that Wi-Fi doesn't make sense, at the end of the day, everything is driven by the business model and by the expectations the consumers have and the amount of money they're willing to pay in their service. So there is lots of cases where, and you were asking about use cases, there are lots of cases where we're combining our products for the backhaul part of it, and then we're using Wi-Fi for the edge part of it. So to do either indoor coverage or in-house coverage, Wi-Fi, now with the new standards on 802.11, Wi-Fi can do a very good job. And then, if you want to have high-grade backhaul network, then we're using our technology. So we have a number of networks deployed that are combining both Wi-Fi unlicensed and CBNL products licensed.
And are you doing all that in-house, or are you partnering with the likes of Ruckus and those guys to deliver on that?
So clearly, I mean, all the licensed products, we do that in-house. We own all the IP, We design everything by ourselves. We have a team of 40 engineers here in Cambridge that are developing the latest technologies and solutions in-house. We own all of that. And for the edge side of it, so the Wi-Fi type of products, we have partnership with a number of, I would say, major vendors. So we've done a few networks with Ruckus, but we're doing that as well with some Cisco products and whatever. So we are pretty open in terms of interfacing with the Wi-Fi vendors.
Pretty agnostic as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, very agnostic, yes.
So listen, finally, I'm going to ask you a sort of geopolitical, socio-political question. Spectrum management is very topical at the moment. I have this theory that governments feel that they missed the first boat in terms of being meaningfully involved in the rollout and management of mobile infrastructure, a process which, of course, led to the rise of these massive 800-pound gorillas like MTN, Econet, Vodacom and Airtel on the continent. So now there's no doubt that African governments, not least Egypt and South Africa more recently, are trying to make sure that when it comes to the allocation of LTE spectrum, for example, that one, they don't enable mobile networks to maintain unfair monopolies, and two, they find ways for their their constituents, i.e., the public, that we the people profit more directly from the growth in the sector. So what do you make of this theory of mine, and what are your thoughts on how best to manage spectrum allocation and the growth and hopefully the proliferation of mobile wireless and broadband services?
Sure. So, and I think, Angela, this is a very, very good question, and I would bring several answers to that. So first, as you know, the spectrum is being granted by the regulators. So first thing, I think the regulators have learned from the mistakes they have made in the past, and you clearly know what WiMAX is. If you're looking at the amount of money that the regulators were asking for WiMAX licenses, that was really, crazy. Those guys were asking so much money that the business cases of the operators didn't make sense. So, when you have to, just to give you an example, in Europe, the WiMAX licenses were sold for 150 billion. And then only very few companies were able to survive because of the huge amount of fees they had to pay for the licenses. So if you don't make the business case reliable and viable and sustainable for operators, half or two-thirds of them will disappear and will not survive. So at the end of the day, it will not serve what the regulators are supposed to do, which is to provide high quality and low cost to the population. So once again, if you're only, as per your question, allowing the big guys to survive, then you have little competition, and thus the consumers will not benefit from that competition. So I think they've learned from that, and now they are much more reasonable on what they want to charge the spectrum for. So I think being more realistic makes more sense, and at the end of the day, better serves the consumers. So that's one thing. The other thing that the regulators have done is that now they are, I would say, having a much tighter, look at the different technologies that are being made available on the market. And some of the technologies, for some of the applications, make more cost-effective sense, especially for the population. So I was mentioning what we are doing as a CBNL, so providing point-to-multipoint platforms. Point-to-multipoint, for the reasons that I have explained, provide a 30 to 50% TCO savings. And back to the regulators, in some cases, the regulators have asked the operators to promote point-to-multipoint because it was providing a much lower cost, less expensive service to the population. So they are available technologies like the ones that we are providing, and for which now the regulators are asking the operators to have a very good look at what those technologies are doing, and sometimes they are imposing those technologies to be deployed for certain requirements.
Which, of course, you don't mind at all.
Of course, we don't mind at all.
And so perhaps for my last question, is there a technology trend, an innovation trend globally or here on the continent that's, exciting you perhaps more than others at the moment?
Well, I think what is exciting for us is to start from a situation where you have a huge digital divide, where there's no infrastructure, when the environment doesn't make it easy to deploy a fiber network or whatever, and to match that with a very strong demand from the population to have the quality of service, the low cost that you were mentioning. So that's why we've been extremely excited and I would say successful in Africa. As you might know, we're doing business with about 24 customers in Africa in about 14 countries. We've been very active on the continent for more than 10 years. We have major networks being deployed, starting from Greenfield, and I think all of that is extremely exciting. So to be more precise, I think there's a number of very interesting networks that we have deployed, and I could name a few, but as I said, we've deployed with more than 24 customers. So one of them is clearly what we have been doing with the MTN group across Africa. It's a customer we've been working with for 10 years. We've deployed, a major network in Nigeria. So basically providing the global infrastructure for their wireless network. So I think that's interesting. This is growing. And the interesting thing with MTN is that we started with one country and now we're expanding in many more countries with them. So I think this is very interesting. This is backhaul. We are now also doing enterprise with MTN, but we started with that backhaul one. The other one which is interesting is Vodacom. Vodacom is a long-time customer of CBNL, and we're doing a lot of enterprise networks with Vodacom. So we're providing businesses with high throughput, high connectivity, and that's an interesting one as well.
And if I prevailed upon you to choose a trend outside of your core business, what would it be? Like as random as you like, sir. Fintech. E-learning. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe you like how thin televisions are getting.
Well, I think once again, I think what is extremely interesting is how people want to be connected in their private life now. So in the past, connection, telecommunication was only for basically business life. Now everyone wants to be connected. So the thing that amazes me is when I see those people running with their iPhones and measuring the speed they've been reaching and the number of steps they've been doing, the number of floors they've been climbing, and to go back home to connect that on their computer and see the statistics. So I think that's a very interesting trend. So all the things that are related to having your private life online now, I think is quite exciting.
Okay, I think that's as good a place as any to end it. Thank you very much, Lionel, for your time, and all the best with it. Here's to hoping our paths cross soon.
Well, thank you very much for spending the time with us, and looking forward to updating you on the next big things for Africa or around the world.
Awesome.